Iraq in the 20th century encapsulates the history of much of the Middle East. Imperialism, oil, nationalism, political turmoil, modernization, and even dictatorship. For the past 4 decades, the country has been gripped by conflict as it struggles to find a viable system of governance that can cater to the different groups living within Iraq. This issue was exacerbated by Saddam Hussein as he set up a tyrannical regime which served himself above his own citizens. This was very different from the role he played in the 1970s as vice president, where under his stewardship, Iraqi society made major advancements, both socially and materially. But from the 1980s onwards, the authoritarian nature of his rule poisoned much of the previous progress. Whilst Saddam's regime was exceptional in its brutality and oppression, it was nonetheless a continuation of political turmoil that the country experienced ever since the 1920s. Iraq had gained its independence from Britain in 1932 as a result of a very strong nationalist movement inside of the country. But this independence was nominal at best, since the British still controlled the country's foreign affairs and oil supply. This fostered huge resentment amongst most sectors of Iraqi society at the British lack of respect for Iraq's sovereignty. Iraqi nationalists were given an opportunity to free themselves from the shackles of imperialism with the start of World War II. Led by Rashid Ali Gaylani, the nationalists sought to counterbalance the British by aligning themselves with Germany, subsequently seizing power in a coup on April 1st, 1941. But Iraq and its resources were too important to the Allied war effort to let this happen. So a month later, the British invaded the country and occupied it once again. In the midst of the British jubilation at their victory in World War II, they soon realized they no longer had the capacity to maintain their huge empire. This was especially the case in the Middle East, where nationalism was proving itself to be a powerful force in expressing the wishes and desires of millions of Arabs. In Iraq, Rashid Ali Gaylani was not alone in wanting to expel the British from his country. Arab nationalist ideas had firmly infiltrated across all strata of society. In 1948, the Iraqi government tried to sign a revision of the 1930 Anglo-Iraqi Treaty, which would have seen British influence inside the country continue. But the Iraqi people rose up and showed their displeasure in the subsequent Al-Wathba uprising. In 1952, the Iraqi Intifada took place, with widespread strikes and protests calling for an end to the British presence in the country, and some even calling for King Faisal to resign. Prominent thinkers such as Sati al-Husri had used his position as Director of General Education in the 1920s to allow pan-Arab beliefs to seep into the very fabric of the education system. From the 1940s onwards, there emerged a trend amongst educated military officers politicized by nationalism who subsequently tried to vie for power. This trend was only encouraged by the success of the Egyptian Free Officers Group that spearheaded the 1952 revolution. When its leader Jamal Abdel Nasser followed that up with a victory in the Suez Crisis of 1956, the Arab world's imagination was set on fire. In Nasser, the Iraqi nationalists saw a symbol that they could emulate, leading politically conscious military officers to organize and model themselves after Nasser's free officer movement. The Hashemite monarchy, for its part, had tried to undermine the popularity of these populist ideologies by promising land reforms and greater rights to its citizens. The government's position had been strengthened by the fact that it was receiving more and more money thanks to its oil revenue. But for many in the country, these reforms were not enough, and it was hard to argue with them. Almost all of the wealth generated from oil went directly to the British or a small group of Iraqi elites. Iraq's increasing prosperity could not stop the spirit of rebellion, and everything would change on July 14, 1958. At the beginning of the year, the Hashemite monarchies of Jordan and Iraq formed the Arab Federation, a confederation that was supposed to rival Egypt and Syria's merger into the United Arab Republic that same year. Later that summer, Jordan's King Hussein requested his cousin Faisal of Iraq to send military units to Jordan for fear of a Syrian attack. The Iraqi Free officers saw this as the perfect opportunity to strike. The secret group's leader, Abdul Karim Qasim, a high-ranking army officer, decided against marching to the Jordanian border and instead turned on Baghdad, seizing the capital. The coup was effective, but it did set a bloody precedent for the future of political transitions in the country. Since much of the royal family was executed, including King Faisal and his uncle, the former regent Abdullah, Prime Minister Nouri al-Said tried to escape dressed as a woman in an abaya, but was caught and shot. Prince Abdullah and Prime Minister Said's bodies were then mutilated and dragged through the streets of Baghdad by the angry mob. The new revolutionary government under Prime Minister Qasim had come to power with a message that cut across political factions. Whilst this helped in terms of giving it greater popularity, it also provided it with a lack of direction and ideological structure. Two main strands of thought emerged in this confused atmosphere. One, supported by Qasim and the Iraqi Communist Party, focused on a Wataniya or Iraq First policy, whilst another, espoused by pro-Nasirists and the Ba'athist Party, wanted Qawmiya or Pan-Arab policies. The latter sought to unite with Nasser's United Arab Republic, whilst Qasim and his supporters wanted to put Iraq first and foremost. Despite these issues, things actually started out pretty well for the newly established Iraqi Republic. Social reforms were implemented, ties were forged with the USSR, and more favourable terms were negotiated with the oil company. Initially, Qasim was hugely popular amongst the Kurds as well, especially since he was part Kurdish on his mother's side. He even invited prominent Kurdish leader Mustafa Barzani to return from exile, promising to give Kurds regional autonomy in return for supporting his policies. But by 1961, these relations had soured so much due to distrust that the first Iraqi-Kurdish war began that year. At the same time, Qasim pursued an aggressive foreign policy that saw him become isolated. He shunned Western powers, choosing to establish friendly relations with the Soviet Union. He also declared a number of irredentist claims that threatened its neighbors Iran and Kuwait. The latter specifically would be menaced by Iraqi claims on its territories throughout the second half of the 20th century. To make matters worse, Qasim was gaining foes inside of his government as well. His refusal to expand pan-Arab relations angered many of the people he had worked with in the 1958 revolution. In 1959, there was even an assassination attempt on his life by Baathists that involved a young Saddam Hussein. Consequently, he cracked down on dissent, even going on to execute or jail many opponents, including his close friend Abdul Salam Arif, who had also been a leading force behind the 1958 revolution. Leaving himself politically isolated, it was no surprise when Ba'athist officers toppled Qasim's government in the Ramadan Revolution of 1963. Ironically, Qasim and his comrades died the same way the former King Faisal had died at their hands, the only difference being a brief show trial prior to the execution. Similar to Syria, Iraq's political scene in the 1960s was incredibly chaotic. Before the end of 1963, there was yet another revolution, this time seeing Nasserist officers overthrowing the Baathists when negotiations to unite with Syria and Egypt failed. For the next 5 years, Abdul Salam Arif ruled, followed shortly after by his brother Abdul Rahman. Their rule saw coup attempts from the Baathists until finally, in July 1968, the party took power under Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr. As president, al-Bakr pursued a policy of nepotism that saw the rise of his kinsman Saddam Hussein. This nepotism would have huge ramifications for the rest of Iraq's history, as the preference of placing fellow Sunni Arabs from the north in important positions would destabilize the country's already somewhat fragile relations between Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds. Through a mix of political genius and unprecedented brutality, by the early 1970s, Saddam became the leading figure within the government, even overshadowing President al-Bakr. Saddam's career prior to 1968 was unremarkable to say the least. He was neither a military man nor an intellectual. He had thrown his lot in with some of his Tikriti kinsmen who happened to be Baathists. Subsequently, he was used as a strongman and thug by the party, with Abdul Karim Qasim's assassination in 1959 being one such example. After 1968, he was catapulted into the political limelight when he became al-Bakr's deputy. For as long as Saddam had been alive, massive tensions existed within Iraqi society that cut across ethnic, religious, political, and socio-economic lines. As a result, he set about to achieve a dual purpose: stabilize the political system by unifying the Baathist party, as well as addressing economic issues by improving basic living standards. But Saddam was no angel. He did not do this out of the kindness of his heart necessarily. His attempt to unify the Baathists also increased his power within the party, to the point that he became the de facto leader of Iraq by the second half of the 1970s. Addressing the country's socio-economic needs also heightened his prestige and legitimacy amongst ordinary Iraqis, encouraging him to pursue the promotion of a Stalin-esque cult of personality. Saddam's rise to power went hand in hand with the immense progression that took place in 1970s Iraq. As a result of its oil reserves, the economy rose rapidly. In 1972, the country nationalized its oil industry, thereby pocketing more of the profit. A year later, oil prices boomed in the aftermath of the 1973 oil crisis, and Iraq, like many other OPEC members, benefited tremendously. Saddam sought to mollify and bring stability to Iraqi society by using this money to improve services for ordinary people. At the time, what Iraq was offering its citizens was extraordinary and found few parallels across the Middle East. Saddam supervised the National Infrastructure Program, which saw the construction of schools, roads, and hospitals. Iraq's public health system became a regional leader as healthcare was made free, a feat that earned Saddam an award from UNESCO. Education also became public and free on all levels, as hundreds of thousands of Iraqis learned to read within the space of a few years. The government even supported farmers by providing massive subsidies. All the while, Saddam was strengthening his grip on society. In a carrot-and-stick approach, he had fostered the development of the Mukhabarat, the Iraqi intelligence service. Initially, this was mainly used against political opponents, but after 1979, the Mukhabarat was turned against every Iraqi, again drawing parallels with Stalinist Russia. When President al-Bakr stepped down in 1979, apparently for health reasons, Saddam pulled off a chilling and dramatic show of his power. In July, a week after becoming president, he convened an assembly of Baathist leaders, where he told them that he had uncovered a plot against the government within the party. With an incredible flair for the dramatic, Saddam sat there disappointed and visibly hurt by the supposed betrayal, as the whole affair was videotaped. One of the alleged leaders of the conspiracy, the ex-president's secretary who happened to be tortured beforehand, then read out 68 names of party members that were apparently involved. These men were subsequently executed over the course of the next few weeks. Saddam had completed his purge and was now the undisputed leader. But what ensued was a far cry from the success the country had enjoyed just a few years ago. An Islamic Republic had been established in Iran by Ayatollah Khomeini the same year that Saddam had become president. Subsequently, he became worried that the new Shia theocratic government would exploit Iraq's sectarian tensions, a problem that was especially worrisome for Saddam since Iraq was majority Shia, even though its government was largely ruled by Sunnis. In addition, Iraq had irredentist claims over Iran's Arab-dominant Khuzestan province since the 1960s. In 1974, when the Second Iraqi-Kurdish War started, the Iraqi government had to go to war with Mustafa Barzani's Kurdish militia that was supported by the then ruling Shah of Iran. The war only ended when Iran promised to stop aiding the Kurds in return for resolutions to border issues along the Persian Gulf at the 1975 Algiers Agreement. All these factors combined to ensure that by 1980, the relations between Iraq and Iran reached boiling point. In September of that year, Saddam abrogated the Algiers Agreement and invaded Iran, hoping that his military superiority as well as Iran's domestic turmoil would win him the war. But this did not happen. Instead, Iran became galvanized by the outside threat and met the invasion with stiff resistance. The war would drag on for 8 long years, with no territorial gains for either side, as it resulted in a stalemate. Unfortunately for the Iraqi people, the war undermined much of the socio-economic development that had taken place in the previous decade. Saddam's rule would stubbornly survive until 2003, when an international coalition led by the USA invaded Iraq and ousted the Baathists from power. Saddam was subsequently tried for crimes against humanity and hanged in 2006. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Don't forget to check out the other videos in the Making of the Modern Middle East series. I'm almost finished, I just have Jordan left. As usual, big thank you to my patrons for their continued support. Also, I want to give a shout out to Muhammad Raisul Kailani for his help on this script. Thank you, man. And before I go, I want to address something very quickly. I'm sure many of you will wonder why the Kurdish story features so little in this video. There's a simple reason for that. My aim with this video is to give a general overview of Iraq's history from the 1940s until the 1970s. This means that anything which requires me to go into any detail but veers away from approaching Iraqi history in this period from a bird's eye point of view will be left out. I hope that makes sense. Basically what I'm trying to say is that this video is a general overview and I am not afforded the time to go into any meaningful depth about certain topics within the general overview. I do intend to make more content about Kurds in general, and if you want to know more about their 20th century history, check out my video on why Kurdistan is not a country. Until next time, peace!